Hi, Joe Peprocki, National Consultant for Faith Formation at Loyola Press, a Jesuit ministry in Chicago. And welcome to this webinar, a Loyola Press webinar. The title of it, Praying with Our Feet, a concept perhaps you have not heard of before, but you're going to get to know in just a few moments with our guest, Dr. Ansel Augustine, who you can see is already with us. And I'll introduce him formally in another moment. But I want to welcome all of you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for participating in this webinar, whether you're live or you're watching this as a recording. If you're live, please feel free to go into the chat, introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and get to meet some people from all over the world. And just to let you know, we're in the webinar format, so you won't be able to turn on your camera or to unmute yourself. You'll just be listening and seeing myself and Ansel, mostly Ansel. My job after I get done with this housekeeping is to get out of the way and let him share his wisdom and insights. Um, and a recording will be available of this webinar soon. We'll be letting you know when that's available. It'll be at ignatianspirituality.com. We'll also send the recording, a link of the recording to all of the registrants by email as well. And then finally, if you have questions for Ansel during this presentation, please use the Q&A feature to put those questions in. And my colleague Denise, who's behind the curtain right now, we'll be sorting through those. And with about 10, 15 minutes left in the webinar, we turn it over to her to lead us through the Q&A. So without further ado, I want to jump into this. I don't want to waste any time, but I want to introduce you to my friend, Dr. Ansel Augustine. Ansel found his way onto my radar, and I want to say he exploded onto my radar. He didn't just sort of creep in. It exploded onto my radar about 13 years ago. Isn't it hard to believe, Ansel? It's been that long.
Man, wow.
One of us is getting older. I'm not sure who it is. And we got to know each other, and then Ansel became and still is a member of our speaker corps at Loyola Press. We've been good friends now for these many years, and he's achieved a dream that I feel like I shared in, but it's mainly his dream to write a book for Loyola Press, and that is praying with our feet. I'm trying to make sure that there's no glare on that. And so you got to promise you're going to sign this for me
I,
when we see
of
each other
course.
in person. Welcome, Ansel. How are you?
I'm good, brother. I'm good and glad to be here with you and everybody. If I'm a little scatterbrained, just I've been traveling. I've been up since 1 a.m. Traveling here back home to New Orleans. I'm living in DC now, but I'm good. So it's good to be here with you.
Great to have you with us. The Holy Spirit will make sure the marbles stay in place there, at least for the next hour, while we continue to talk. Ansel, tell us a little bit about what you're doing with your life and career right now.
Well, presently I work for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. I'm the assistant director for African American Affairs there. And it's funny this journey, Joe, right now I'm in, and it is weird. I'm doing this webinar from my very first office space when I became a youth minister 26 years ago at my
I
home
love
parish
it.
here at St. Peter Claver. And
Yeah.
just that journey in and of itself, I used to work in radio. Like my friends used to say, I have a face for radio. So I used to work in radio, and then my father figure was mentor was our pastor at the time, Father Michael Jacques, who passed away in 2013. And he asked me to chaperone one of our high school lock-ins. We were short male
Mm,
chaperones. And so I did that, and I fell in love with the young people because many of them came from my neighborhood and they knew me, as they were growing up, and they heard of me, and they knew my friends that unfortunately are no longer here, but they knew them or were related to them. And so I would get a ride as much as I could from uptown at Loyola, New Orleans, to get here downtown on Wednesday nights to be with the youth group. And from then, that's where, it's been. And that's been my motivation, as you know, Joe, is the
yeah.
young people in my community, just to see if Mr. Ansel could do it, I could do it too. And that's pretty much it. So that's been my motivation and my thrust in ministry. So to be at the USCCB every morning when I'm driving to work, it's like, I don't know how this happened, but, there's a voice in my head that God said, you need to be here. And I got you while you're here. So that's been my journey.
It's wonderful and it's very inspiring, Ansel. And we're just so thrilled that you're on a larger stage because you have a very important message to get out to the world. And we're so glad that that's happening at this point. And you got a nickname from your work there, Preach, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. In fact, this morning when I landed, I went to walk through the neighborhood to, take care of some errands. And of course, like I heard from one of the cars, preach you home. And I'm like, yeah, for a couple of days. So
I
yeah,
love
so
it.
it's cool.
That's always wonderful to hear. Ansel, years ago, you and I talked about the idea of you writing a book. We brainstormed about it. We talked about it several times. And then I recall one time I'm looking on Facebook and I see that you gave a talk. And the title of the talk is Praying with Our Feet. And I read through like what this was about. And then I got in touch with you. I'm like, Ansel, there's your book. Get on it. And you
Yes,
got on it.
indeed.
And here it is. Congratulations. And so give us a 2 minute overview of what this book is all about.
All right. No, thank you, Joe. And thank you for your push of all these years to get me to this point. And first of all, let me say I see Professor Michael Howard is on here from
Oh,
Loyola
hello,
Marymount
Professor.
University, and he's a mutual friend of both of us. So I just wanted to say hello to Michael. Thank you for joining us. Um, but even the term praying with our feet, it just talks about why we are called to be people of faith, put our faith into action, not just pray about it, but to be about it, put our prayer into action. And that's what this is about. And the term praying with our feet comes from the Jewish rabbi Abraham Joshua Herschel, who marched in the Selma civil rights movement.
Hmm.
And he was asked by a reporter, shouldn't you be in your temple praying? And he said, well, I am praying. I'm praying with my feet, putting his
Hmm.
faith into action. And for me, my home church, where I'm at right now, St. Peter Claver, has always been an active parish in the community, especially pre-Katrina. We were connected with the community. We were doing things, fighting the injustices, whether it was drugs in the community, whether it was poverty in the community. Just this afternoon when I landed, I was helping at the food bank across the street,
Hmm.
meeting the needs of the people that are here. And still, ministry post Katrina, it's still the neighborhood has changed, but the needs are still the same in some ways. So faith calls us in that way. Being praying with our feet calls us to be prophetic and connective and active with the community that surrounds us. And that's what this book is about.
And I love that you're telling us that it's not an either or.
Right.
Praying with our feet, it's prayer and action together, action and contemplation. And that's a very Ignatian concept, which is why Loyola Press loved the idea of this book. We'll get back to that in a second, but you've had many people inspire you over the years. You very much embody a culture that honors ancestors
Right.
and honors mentors. And you've talked about several of them to me over the years and in your talks and in your writings and so on, but none more um, influential than the late great Bishop Fernand Sherry.
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit about this mentorship and how he was a person who prayed with his feet.
Yeah, so Bishop Cherie, he was a diocesan priest here in the Archdiocese of New Orleans, and then he went and joined the Franciscans. Don't ask me which order of the Franciscans, but he wore the brown robe, right? And
Right.
but and he came home. I want to say 2014, 2015 is when he became our auxiliary bishop. But in
Okay.
the words of Saint Ignatius, um, love is shown more in deeds than in words.
Mhm.
And he lived that. He was a person who lived for others. I've seen him help young people still, even when he became bishop, he was still helping young people back in Quincy University in Quincy, Illinois, where he was the campus minister. He
Mhm.
still was helping young adults here at Xavier because he was a campus minister here for a bit. And in those spaces and places, especially when I was running the Office of Black Catholics at the time when he became the auxiliary. So he became my supervisor. But during his installation mass, you know, um, all these people from around the country, that he impacted came, and it was just a joyous celebration when they were telling me about what Father Ferd meant to them, and so it was just that. So he was not just a supervisor, he was a friend, but he was more also family, and like almost like I call him a Uncle Bishop, just like his actual nephew does, Lil Richie calls him Uncle Bishop. And so I was using that as a joke for him. And so one of the stories I have about him is Hurricane Ida. When he did not want to evacuate. Everybody was telling him get out of town. And so, my sister and her boyfriend is FBI, they left, and I was going to leave with them, but I can't leave Bishop. So I went to the residence. His niece came from Xavier to the residence. So we were there. I'm like, Bishop, I think we need to leave. He was like, no, we'll be fine. Well, when the power went out, he was like, yeah. And it was summertime, remember, August,
Oh,
uh, because it hit the same day of Katrina, August 29th. And he was just like, maybe we should have
oh my.
left. And so we ended up going to Montgomery, Alabama, staying with Father Manuel Williams at Resurrection Catholic Ministries. But all Bishop Shree was worried about, he wasn't worried about his residence. He wasn't worried
Mhm.
about, whatever his needs were. He was helping, he asked me to help him organize folks to help the people of New Orleans, not just even St. Peter Claver Parish, because that's where he was administrator of
Mhm.
this parish. That's why, I was here helping him. Um, he was worried about all the people of the archdiocese and how he could help them. And so seeing him work tirelessly to get that stuff done, I just saw him be a man for others, and pray with his feet in a way that, I try to model today.
And you do that, Ansel, and God bless Bishop Sherry for the impact he had on so many people's lives, but on your life especially, and how you've continued to carry that forward. And one of the ways that we talk about this notion of praying with our feet is that our church talks about how our action really has 2 feet involved in it. One is charity, of course, which is, giving to other people for their needs. But the other foot is social justice, social action, actually getting involved. Talk a little bit more about our what sometimes people call the well-kept secret of the Catholic Church,
Oh,
Catholic social teaching, which seems to have a bit of a revival with Pope Leo XIV, since Pope Leo XIII was the father of Catholic
yeah,
social
social
teaching. So
teaching.
walk us through a little bit about what this is all about.
Yeah, so for me, the model that I use in the book is the Kwanzaa principle of Ujima. And what it means is, we talk about this day of Kwanzaa. Ujima means our brothers and sisters' problems are our problems, meaning no matter what is they're dealing with, we're affected by it too, and we're called to help them meet that need. And so we're connected with those on the peripheries, those on the margins. So if you have an issue with somebody, or if something is going on in somebody's life, whether we are connected or affects us or not, and they're in our sphere, it matters to us. We are connected. So my question when I talk about Catholic social teaching, and I see the PowerPoint went down,
I'll get it right back up for
no
you.
problem. When we look at Catholic social teaching, these aspects of Catholic social teaching, no matter what they are, there I'm guarantee you that there is someone in your community, in your network that is affected by this, whether positive or negative. So for us as people of faith, baptized as priests, prophet, and king, we're called to live out these baptismal call to make a difference in society and be the light in the world. So when we look at that, I ask this question to the people on the webinar right now, whether you're watching it live or the recording. Who are the people on the peripheries or margins in your community? Who are they? And Catholic social teaching gives us concrete ways for us to put faith into action. And that's what it's all about. Using these ways, looking at these factors so that we are all connected. Like my brother Mary Ellen just said here, Mary Ellen Dolan, Ubuntu, I am because we are.
Mhm.
We are connected. And if we don't understand that, that's how we fail sometimes, the most vulnerable in society, which we are called to protect and live up, whoever they are and whatever their circumstances are. And that's what it is. Our faith through Catholic social teaching is a way for us to not only show up, but to let God show out through us showing up.
Great. And that's a concept you'll be talking about a little bit later on, as
Mhm.
well as the notion of solidarity, which
Yes.
is the phrase that the church uses to refer to what you were just talking about, that we all belong to one another. One of the things that I was particularly impressed with your book, and so was that you brought together, and I think this is why Loyola Press got so excited. You brought together Ignatian spirituality, the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, and Catholic social teaching. I've not seen this done before. And you have wedded the two together the way it's supposed to be. These are supposed to be two dance partners who can't be separated.
Mhm.
Talk a little bit about how you did this and why you did this in your book.
Well, I would say if we look at the 2 feet of Catholic social teaching, this is probably the dance, as you said, putting the
Okay.
feet into action, the journey that these feet go on. And, first of all, I just want to say thank you to you, Joe, and Maura for helping me flush out this idea in my head and how it could make sense.
It was
And
just
so
so
for
wonderful. We were like, yeah, this is it.
and y'all helped me put the verbiage, put the
Right.
meat on the skeleton. And so for me, being Jesuit educated, at Loyola New Orleans here, for my undergrad and my master's that I did here, and also at Xavier University of Louisiana, this is just what it means for me to live out my faith. The journey of reflection, that's the power of the spiritual exercises. It calls us to put a mirror to ourselves, put a mirror to our journey. And so Catholic social teaching calls us to put a mirror to society. And how are we called to respond? Through the reflection, through the scripture, through the discernment period, all that stuff, putting it into action. So how do we take all this that we're reflecting on? We see that this is what God is calling us to do. So how do we do it? And Catholic social teaching helps us put the feet into movement. Like I said, that dance between,
Hmm.
the spiritual exercises and Catholic social teaching. And this is how, as we say with the book, is to live our faith out loud in a world that needs it. We are called, as I said before, to be those prophets, those witnesses in a world that needs to know Jesus is still alive. His love is still alive. His prophetic liberation to all humankind is still relevant today, but we are called to be the messengers of it. We can't wait on anybody else. It's up to us.
Absolutely. And um, I think one of the wonderful things that you've done here, the gift that you've given to the church, is, and you probably have experienced this over the years, young people especially who go on a retreat
Mhm.
and they get all fired up. And of course, the spiritual exercises is an extended retreat. The question many people have at the end of a retreat is, okay, well, now what do I do? I'm
Mhm.
all fired up. I want to do something. And basically, what you've laid out the plan for us, and say, well, the church tells us what to do. This is how we have to start thinking
Mhm.
along these lines. I just want to draw people's attention to, if you don't know the spiritual exercises, it's in 4 weeks. That's not necessarily numbered by 7 days a week, but it's just, structure. And the basic focus is week one is purgation. We'll talk about that next. Week two, illumination. Weeks three and four, union. So traditionally, there's seen as three phases of the spiritual life. So that's how Ansel organizes this, and we're going to jump right into purgation.
Mhm.
So week one of the spiritual exercises really calls us to take a close look at ourselves. You mentioned this notion of looking in the mirror. Um, what I like what you do in the book is, and you say right here on the screen, while our spiritual awakening compels us to deal with our own sins, which we often do on retreat, it also urges us to deal with the realities of sin that surround us. So you're helping to expand our notion of purgation. Walk
Mhm.
us through this. Talk a little bit more about how do we participate in the purgation of the world, of society.
Well, I think what we do is this is a notion and a model that we use at Xavier at the Institute for Black Catholic Studies, but also in a lot of our Black spirituality, is the notion of this model known as the Bakongo cosmogram. And in it, more commonly, people may refer to it as in the movie The Lion King, The Circle of Life, showing
Okay.
that we're all connected from, before we even enter humanity to our ancestral, after we pass on. And so no matter where you're on the circle, you're connected. And in that space and place, we as human beings, as people of faith, are connected. And so even the hurt and sin that causes the people to be pushed to the peripheries or the margins is part of what we need to address. And so connecting, if we're not connecting with the margin, those on the margins, those on the peripheries, then we're doing a disservice to ourselves because that is part of our faith journey. And the circle itself is broken. This body of Christ, the communion that we're called to have, is
Right.
not fully complete until we are truly connected in a genuine way, with those on the margins. That's who God calls us to be connected with.
Mm.
And this is a quote that's in the book is from, I'm proud to say, my frat brother, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, the late great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, he says this: injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, meaning none of us are free until we're all free, and that's what we have to remember. And so I always use this, and this comes from Father Manuel Williams. He says this to me all the time.
Mm,
The gentleman that Bishop Sheree and I evacuated to in Montgomery, Alabama. He
yeah.
says, did Jesus come to be a chaplain for the elite or a prophet for the people? And that's how we are called to understand ourselves. Who are we called to be, as people of faith? Are we being prophetic in a world that needs it? Or are we just, as Martin Luther King says, a social club that
Mm.
has no relevance in society? And this is what these spiritual exercises calls us to reflect on, to see how we are called to be church in a world that needs us.
And these are very powerful questions for all of us to ask ourselves. And the spiritual exercises are intended for us to be quite honest with ourselves,
Mhm,
to ask very difficult questions. And let's take this a step further, which you
mhm,
do in the book, that one of the ways that we bring about this healing that is needed, the restorative justice that we hear spoken of, is through service to others. You say in the book, acknowledging without judging brokenness and sinfulness is not affirming the sin. It's the first step to healing. It's why we love others and why service should be at the center of any ministry. We're called to see Christ in others. I know the new directory for catechesis uses the phrase catechesis in action.
mhm.
Talk a little bit more about this notion of being in service to others should be at the center of any ministry in the church.
Right. Well, I think for me, when I came back home to help Bishop Cherie, this was after the pandemic. New Orleans, Louisiana, period. Our main economic boost is tourism. But of course,
Right.
the pandemic shut everything down, and it was a dire scene here in New Orleans coming home. And so one of the things we used to do, and I still do it even up in DC. I play Santa Claus during the winter. The difference I say this is it's actually cold in DC during winter, right? So I'm not sweating as much in that Santa suit. But we would do it here. And it's in the book, this story, and I won't go through the whole details of it, but there was a young girl that we found out after Christmas that didn't get any gifts, right?
Mm,
And we would give gifts out to the culture bearers, the musicians, and people that didn't have gig work. So they were struggling to make ends meet with their family. And so this one girl, we said we would meet her. I would dress up as Santa Claus, a couple of days after Christmas and make a special visit with her. And so we met at a place, community center here. She came, was excited. Of course, Santa made a special trip, all these things. Well,
sure.
then a car pulled up. Her uncle and aunt brought her, but another car pulled up with these two young men in it. And the first young man got out. Come to find out, it was the father. The father was
Mm,
a pimp, for lack of better words. And so he said he gave up that lifestyle because he wanted to do what was right for his daughter, but he
okay.
wasn't making any money. And the mother was a prostitute. Mother wasn't in the picture. And so when we were talking to the young man, the other young man recognized my voice even with the Santa suit on, and he was just like, Mr. Ansel. And it
Mm,
was one of my former students.
wow.
And he said, Mr. Ansel could help you. And so the other young man, the father, said, well, look, if you promise to help take care of my daughter, I'll turn myself in, because he was trying to figure out how to turn
Mm,
himself in, but making sure his daughter was straight. And didn't know how to answer. And of course, me being who I am, I said, okay. And so we're figuring it out. Even still, while I'm here, I'm making sure her name is Serenity, has what she needs, while I'm working with other community people. But I
mm,
share all that because when looking at the situation that father and even the mother, who I've never met, were in, it wasn't about accusing them of their sin, but how do we help them? What are
yeah.
the realities and the circumstances that are causing them to think that this is the reality that they should choose for themselves? Even the violence that goes on in communities. I'm not here to judge people for the violence that goes on, but what are the realities and the systems and things that are in place that are causing people to be violent or choose, robbing, or all these things that are there. And how are we as people of faith called to address these injustices? And I think that's the power of healing sin through service, because when you encounter people, we're not bringing Jesus to them. Jesus is already there. We're
Yes.
encountering the Jesus that's there. And so we are forming, that's what solidarity and that's what true connection and relationship looks like. Not accusing the sinner, but trying to fight the sin that's causing them to be sinful.
And the example that you gave, it's a dramatic example, but it's
Mhm,
something that all of us need to stop and think about because, we're dealing with lots of issues in our society right now, in particular the immigration issue. And
mhm,
it's real easy for people to sit back and to judge and say, well, my ancestors came here legally, and then these folks are not. Um, to minister to people who are in these situations and to want to treat them with human dignity
mhm,
is, as you said, not affirming the sin. It's the first step to healing a broken process.
mhm.
And so there's much to learn. And so I love how your book speaks to examples from your life that are easily applicable to many of the examples and experiences that we're all experiencing today. And it reinforces this notion that you spoke of earlier, that we all belong to each other. And one of the principles of Catholic social teaching, which you chose to talk about it, you talk about all of them in the book, but for this webinar, you said let's talk about this one,
Right.
solidarity. You mentioned that solidarity is a deeper, more enduring commitment to standing alongside the marginalized and oppressed,
Mhm.
recognizing their inherent dignity and shared humanity. And I love this. Charity can be done from a distance. Solidarity is a form of accompaniment. Talk to us more about solidarity, Ansel.
I look at, when we are looking at some of the needs in our community. We have, and I always question this, why is there an affluent parish a couple of blocks away from a struggling parish? You know
Yeah,
what I'm saying? And why is that a reality in many of our spaces and places? But that's reality. And sometimes in the form of charity, the more affluent parish might just write a check to help whatever is there, rather than really engaging with the community or the other people to see what the needs are and how they can connect with one another and do that work. So here's my thing. If we truly believe that we are all made in the image and likeness of God, then we are all connected as brothers and sisters under the same Father. And thus we need to connect and we need to be connected with one another and those needs. And so even for me, my heart as a Hurricane Katrina survivor, we'll talk about this later, I know,
yeah,
is broken watching all the flooding going on in Texas.
yes.
The realities in North Carolina. I think there's wildfires in Europe going on right now and different
Hmm.
things like now, and these things that people are struggling with. But there's so much going on. Sometimes you wonder that is this just a news thing that that is just something that's going to be forgotten in another couple of hours because something else is going to happen. And thus we are not connected. And so for us, we are called to be more intentional, to be connected with one another. Because as I said before, that concept of ujima, what happens to my brothers and sisters is my problem as well.
Yeah,
And this also ties into the Jesuit value of cura personalis, care for each other. We are called to care for each other. If I have a blessing, I'm not called to hoard it to myself. I'm called to share it.
yeah,
And that's what we're called to be. And that's what true solidarity looks like. It's not about charity. All right, yep, here you go, bye. But no, here, my brother, here, my sister, how can I help you? How can I engage with you? And not to say come in as a savior, but how can I empower you to do what you already have within yourself, but also walk with you on that journey so you're not alone. That's what God does for us.
and I love what you said before. A good reminder for all of us that when we reach out to people on the margins, we're not bringing God to them. God is there already.
Mhm.
And so we learn so much from those on the margins. You're going to talk a little bit later on about your work with those who are incarcerated and how much you've learned from them.
Mhm.
And I think that's something that a lot of us miss. We think that, oh well, look at me, the great largesse that I have, reaching out to these people, bringing God to them. When in reality, we have to recognize God is there, waiting for me to show up to participate in supporting the people that he loves so dearly. So solidarity is something that you very powerfully deal with in the book. Folks, we're talking to Dr. Ansel Augustine and about his book, Praying with Our Feet. If you have questions for Ansel, please go to the Q&A feature and put those in. And in about 20 minutes, we'll switch to a Q&A. Just to let folks know too, every once in a while I do turn the PowerPoint off so you could see Ansel a little closer up. We have folks who have said they don't want to just watch the little thumbnails, so I'm going back and forth. So if it disappears, it will come back. I promise you. Because folks said they're taking notes, and I want you to know that. But let's move on. Week two of the spiritual exercises, we get into illumination, the movement in our spiritual journey when the light bulb starts to
Mhm.
go on a little bit. It
Right,
starts to flicker and shine some light on us. So we call this illumination. And you say in the book, as our spiritual journey continues and deepens, our sight is transformed. We begin to
right,
see the light. We're invited to contemplate Jesus in the Gospels and make a choice to follow him, or, as I like to say, Ansel likes to say, show up so he can show out. I love this
right.
concept, Ansel. Talk us through it.
All right. So, like I told you before, my father figure and, mentor in ministry, first person to give me a job was our former pastor, Father Michael Jacques here
Okay.
at St. Peter Claver, Edmondite priest. And he used to always say this to me. Yeah, it's not about you, but it's about what God does through you. And so to understanding that this is God's work. So even those times we may be fearful, we may be we may be nervous, we may feel like we're inadequate. He's doing it. So even me working where I work, there's a lot of criticism, there's a lot of challenges, there's a lot of lack of resources for things, that I feel are important. But the fact of the matter is, all right, Lord, you got me here. Show up. And
Yeah.
so, and I know it's about him. And I think that's the same thing that we have to think about when we work with those on the margins. You know, we have a light. We have each have unique gifts. And I share this with young people all the time, because this is a generation that's different. Joe, I'll be honest. I don't know. I mean, my whole youth ministry office from 26 years ago. I don't know if I could be a youth minister in 2025. Young people are different. They're raised by this, and it's a different mentality. But when I talk to them, I help them understand, social media is not reality. It's your reality of what you grow up in, but that's not reality. And to help them understand, not the comparison piece, even for us as adults, is a threat to, our own dignity because we're trying to compare ourselves to someone else's blessings that they portray, whether they're true or false on social media, but that sometimes diminishes our light. And so for us, we have to remind ourselves that we are each created for a unique purpose that God has created us for, to make a unique impact in our community, in the world, whatever it may be. And illumination calls us to share that light, that unique light in the world, with others, not to hoard it to ourselves, but to share it.
Mhm.
And so for us, that transformation comes when we realize that piece. That's when I was transformed, when I realized it's not about what Ansel does, it's about what God is doing through Ansel. And that's why I'm able to do what I'm doing because I trust on him. Half the time, Joe, I'm in autopilot. All right, Lord, take over. And that's how it's happened.
And I don't want to waste any time. I want to get right into one of the places that you feel called to show up, so that God can show out is by ministering to those who are incarcerated.
Mhm.
Tell us about this experience.
Okay. Well, the reality is, if you are truly connected with the community, you will deal with what the community deals with. New Orleans is number one in the world for mass incarceration in
Mm,
the world. And so, how can I, as a youth minister, just be focused on what's happening inside my church walls when there's so many pressures and realities that are facing my young people and their families outside? I have family that's incarcerated here in
yeah.
Louisiana. And so the reality is there's a space, Rayburn Correctional Facilities, right? That's one of my homes. St. Gabriel Women's Correctional Facility, that's one of my homes. Angola
Okay.
State Penitentiary, that's one of my homes. And that's why I dedicate in the acknowledgement section of the book, to them. And these men and women, have continued to inspire me because they're locked away from society. Family and friends have forgotten about them. Everything that will make you want to feel hopeless, they show up when we have these retreats, whether it's for the food, whether it's a way for them to even get away from their normal duel, or whether they really want to be there. But when they realize that this is a safe space, they open up. And so for me, there's a man that one of my times visiting home this past year, I was walking through the neighborhood and he pulled up on a bike. Is that Dr. Ansel? And we just happened to be at the same place at the same time. And it wasn't until I asked him to join me for coffee that morning because I couldn't put a finger on who this man was, and I recognized him. But he told me, that he was home trying to get a justice line. And then I realized he was one of the men from the prison retreats,
Oh, okay.
and we exchanged numbers. Joe, my family doesn't check on me like this. Every
Okay.
day, this man, Norman, sends
Mm,
me a text, "Hey Doc, hope you're doing well," blah blah
mm,
blah. It's that joy that he has to have this
yeah.
second chance in life. And
Mm.
even in the walls, there was a second chance they had of being away because they were in a safe space, learning about themselves and connecting with their faith. And so when we go to the margins, as I said before, we're not bringing Jesus there. Jesus is waiting to remind, answer who I am as a child of God through these prisoners that I was encountering. And that's the power of this work.
And I think a very important part of what you're sharing here is that simply by showing up, by
Mhm.
visiting people who are incarcerated, you are respecting their dignity. And this is the principle from Catholic social teaching that you chose to speak about during this particular chapter. You mentioned that Catholic social teaching teaches of the dignity of the human person, calls us to ask whether our actions as a society, again, not just as an individual, respect or threaten the life and dignity of each human being. Again, think about the issues that we're dealing with today. Is the way we're handling particular issues in our society today, do they respect or threaten the life and dignity of each human being? In other words, the way we respond to the needs of people has everything to do with recognizing the presence of Jesus within them. Talk a little bit more about the importance of recognizing the dignity of human persons and how we do that in our everyday lives.
Right. Well, it's funny. One of my former U group kids, who's now is the business manager, was just trying to interrupt the webinar by coming in the door just now.
How about that?
Yeah, that's why I muted myself to tell him I'm doing a webinar. So I'll check in with him later. But the fact of the matter is, even him, we created a space here where our young people realized that they were welcome. So this room I'm in every day at 3 p.m. weekday, I could get never get any work done because those high school students would flood this space because they realized this was a place for them. And one thing that I was raised with was understanding this saying, baby, God don't make no junk. So the fact that God took time to make you, you are of value, whether you're someone that's strung out on drugs or whether you're a billionaire, whether you're someone that's ordained to ministry, whether you're someone that's studying and trying to struggle to pay, make ends meet, whatever it may be, because you exist on this earth, you are of worth. But yet, this is the problem. And Pope Francis, God rest his soul, talked about this. In this capitalistic society, we have a throwaway culture, where worth is determined about what you can do for me or what I can get out of you, or what you
Yeah.
can help me produce, rather than just because you exist, you deserve dignity and love and respect. And so, even with this, you know, in youth ministry circles, in young adult ministry, campus ministry, even the work I do at the USCCB is is not about what you can do for me. It's as a servant leader, how can I help you? How can I empower you to share your gifts? And that's what it's about because each person has their own gifts. So, you know, this is what we need to understand. When we judge people, many of those times, especially those on the peripheries, that's where Jesus is waiting for us. And when
Yeah.
we judge him, are we rejecting the Christ that's there, or are we welcoming him into our lives? And that's what it means when we pray with our feet, that encountering process that Pope Francis wrote about all the time, the encounter of being with people is important. And that's why we need to understand that if someone was created, God had a reason for them to be in our path and in our space and our place.
And when we treat other people with dignity and respect, it's amazing to see quite often how they respond like a flower coming back to life that's been dried up. And I've seen this many, many times. And it's such a reminder to all of us that there are many people who are just parched, that they've had so much dignity stripped of them. And so to just, treat people with respect and dignity is a minor miracle in the lives
Mhm.
of many people and something that we can do each and every day. Let's move on. We're halfway through the spiritual exercises. Let's go into week 3, which we start to talk about union with the Lord. And in week 3 of the exercises, we focus on the suffering of
Mm,
Jesus. And in particular, you mentioned that just as the apostles witnessed the suffering and death of Jesus, we too are called to come face to face with the suffering of God's people. Again, not just our own suffering, the suffering of God's people, the reality of God's mercy and compassion. So, talk a little bit, Ansel, about how week 3 is calling us to come face to face with the suffering of God's people.
amen. And it's never easy. especially for those of us, not to say we're all the same, but some of us, are in ministry because we have big hearts. We have, bleeding hearts for the community and whatever, and to see people suffering, if you're like me, it just breaks your heart because you just want to fix that
Yeah.
person's pain. And
Yeah.
sometimes we're just called not to fix, but to just let them know that they have someone there to walk with them in that journey. And we each have our own crosses to bear, our own unique crosses to bear, and let's be honest, many of us, especially in today's economy, are one paycheck or one bad situation away from being homeless or
Yes.
being on the margins ourselves,
Yes.
and it's a struggle. So just understand the blessings that are there. And I honestly believe in these moments of suffering, Joe, God is always trying to get our attention.
Mm.
God is always trying to get our attention. I go back to the flooding that's going on in Texas and other parts of the
Yeah.
world, the natural disasters. God is trying to get our attention, to understand, are we living out our values as people of faith? Um, and that's why, even for me, having a heart for others, the young man that was just trying to sneak in, my family used to criticize me for always having him around me. And now he's the business manager here and I'm his son's godfather, right?
Wow.
But it's just those kind of things that, I can't make sense of why I act and think the way I do, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes when I'm in certain ministry situations and places, sometimes I feel like, is there something wrong with me? Because I don't think like everybody else, the capitalistic business mindset that sometimes there, I'm like, God is just telling me to help and love and shine light. But we are called to understand that none of us are worthy of what God does for us. But yet he loves us enough to do it through us and with us. And that's the power of this. Because I think, this is one of the quotes from the book is, it's not about me and God. True community is about we and God. And so
Yeah.
how are we living that out? And I think that's what this thing is about, union, knowing that we are journeying together, we are connected together. And yes, also in some of that, it can be overwhelming. So understanding sometimes it's okay to take a step back, because we
Yeah.
got to take care of ourselves too, and then come back and help
Sure.
others as well.
Sure, but it's important what you said about those moments when you stop and you ask, am I normal for thinking this way? I mean, I think those are affirming moments. I would hope for any minister to recognize that we're doing what Dr. King called us to be maladjusted to, certain parts of our culture that are not life-giving. And so, Ansel, you're doing a good job of being maladjusted, and I think we're all called to
Right.
be continue working at that. Um, you mentioned suffering and looking at the suffering of others. You have an experience that you've been involved in with the Peacekeepers Initiative,
Mhm.
and you mentioned in your book it reminded you of the Stations of the Cross during Lent
Yeah.
because that's a time when we look at the suffering of Jesus. Talk to us a little bit about why this experience of working with Peacekeepers Initiative reminded you of this traditional Catholic practice.
Well, one, as you know, I'm sure like with many of you all in certain cities, New Orleans is a very Catholic city. You drink the water, that means you're Catholic. You know what I'm saying? You breathe air, you know what I'm saying? But just these are spiritual practices that I've exposed to my whole life, talking about the Stations of the Cross. But unfortunately, being at times labeled the murder capital of the world, the lack of resources with Louisiana being the poorest state, we go back and forth with Mississippi, the realities of the harsh conditions that are here are also a challenge.
Okay.
And so in the book, I talk about, this Peacekeepers initiative that we restarted. So it was something that existed before I even knew about it, with my friend, Minister Willie Muhammad, who's Islam, and he used to do this stuff before Katrina.
Okay.
And one night, I was driving home and I was held at gunpoint, because I was, on my way to drive, and I was at the wrong
Hmm.
place at the wrong time, and rather than the person pulling the gun, the person freaked out when he saw it was me and ran back to the car.
He
He had a mask
recognized
on.
you.
And I think it was one of my students. That's all I kept thinking. Was that one of my former students? Is this why? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, what is causing this person to have to choose this type of action to survive? Right. And so I reconnected with Brother Willie Muhammad, and we restarted the Peacekeeper Initiative where we try to squash the beef before it gets to violence.
Mm,
And so we're out, there was a time, it was funny, we were riding around like vigilantes, like Batman and Robin in the car, just driving until someone called a hotline. We had a hotline, billboards around the city, yard
mhm,
signs around the city said squash the beef before the grief, and that kind of stuff. And people would call, and we would try to sit groups down and try to
mm,
alleviate tensions before they got violent.
okay.
And it was a drop in the bucket, but that drop mattered to that family and that community, at that time period. And so for us, this is the journey that I feel Christ was on, during the stations of the cross, the accusations that our people have, that's like the when he was judged by, Pilate and them, the tormenting when
Mm,
he was scourged at the pillar, the betrayal when he was mocked by people as he was falling with the crosses and everything. But yet, when people showed up to help, whether it was Veronica wiping his face or Simon of Cyrene, the unfortunate death when the times that there are hopelessness that are going on in our society, or even the resurrection, knowing and reminding ourselves that even when the drops work, whether it's a drop in the bucket, it will work. And that's the whole Peacekeepers Initiative journey. But it also makes me reflect on this quote from our new Pope, Pope Leo the 14th, whose family, by the way, has New Orleans roots just a couple of
yes.
blocks down from here,
New Orleans
in
and
Fifth Ward.
Chicago. How about
Yeah, I know,
that,
right?
Ansel?
Right. Yeah, but just a couple of blocks down here in the Seventh Ward, although that house is not there because of the interstate, but still,
Okay.
just that his quote during his first homily as pontiff was this. One of the quotes, when Jesus asked Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He refers to the love of the Father. It's as if Jesus is saying, only if you have known and experienced this love of God, which never fails, can you feed my lambs. Only in the love of God the Father can you love your brothers and sisters with a greater love by laying down your life for them. And when I hear that, this Peacekeepers Initiative or anything else, it's not about necessarily dying in a physical sense,
Right.
but dying to our comfort. We are called to be uncomfortable, Joe. I think God calls us all to be in those uncomfortable spaces in the margins with people that are constantly uncomfortable to realize ourselves how great God is and see how he makes those uncomfortable situations comfortable for all of us. And that's why our presence is important.
You mentioned just a moment ago the resurrection of Jesus, and with your permission, I need to skip ahead to week 4, where we focus on that now as we take a look at this fourth week, again looking at union, but in the exercises the focus is on the resurrection of Jesus. You mentioned in the book, in many ways, the goal of the fourth week is to embrace what should be the permanent disposition of all Christians, one of joy and hope, accompanied by a refusal to submit to despair amid suffering. I want you to unpack this for us because I think a lot of people, including myself, when we hear this, we're like, so what, you just want us to go around and say, be happy, be joyful. Okay. What do you mean that it should be a permanent disposition of joy and hope?
Well, I go back to Pope Francis's whole document, Joy of the Gospel.
Okay.
If we truly believe in what this gospel message is, then we should be people of joy. Not to say, like you said, not to be happy-go-lucky, not to stereotype anybody, but hippie flower child, everything's great kind of thing. Because,
Yeah.
I struggle on a regular, I have, moments where we want to, just give up. We're human.
Sure.
Our flesh is weak, but our spirit is strong. And that's the thing. We should need to be people of the spirit, relying on what God is calling us to be. Because I think the worst PR move in our church is a unhappy or mean Christian,
Hmm.
right? And we look at the statistics. If we can be truly honest, by the age of 13 or eighth grade, these young people have decided whether or not they're going to stay or leave the church. And many of them are leaving because of the examples they're seeing of like, why
Yeah.
is this the reality of why I should be here?
Yeah.
And then it's a struggle to bring them back. And so much of my work with youth and young adults is trying to help them feel safe in the church. And so for me, I think for me, the disposition in and of itself, Joe, is just being grateful. Even on bad days,
Hmm.
I'm sure even on my worst day, Joe, there will be people in this world that would switch with my space in an instant.
Hmm.
even on my worst days. And
Yeah.
so to be grateful for what God has given me. And so I think this is what we need to see is that just as the Jesuit principle is to see God in all things, even in the bad stuff, and be grateful that that you're going through this because it's preparing you for something. As I said yesterday to some friends, the God's rejection may be protection, you
Mm.
know, and the delay or the no is not maybe a not yet because whatever you're waiting for and praying for may not be ready for you. So to understand that we should be grateful, and that's to me is where joy comes from, that gratefulness. Life is not easy, but we know we're not alone, and that's what I'm grateful for.
And you certainly have a very personal experience of this, of the despair of Hurricane Katrina, something that changed your life forever, and dealing and ministering to other people in despair. Talk through a little bit of this story. I know it's it's not it's a disservice to say do this in a couple of minutes,
Right.
but tell us a little bit about how you and others fought to overcome despair in the light of Hurricane Katrina.
I think for me, the despair, of course, losing loved ones, losing the way of life. If I had one wish, Joe, I would bring back pre-Katrina New Orleans in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
There was a community here, there was a vibe here, there was just a way of life, and just the way of being. And to have lost that, it was hard. But I say that because we're coming up on the 20th anniversary this
Mm,
August
right.
of Katrina and the things that are going on. So for us, that reality is knowing that we are called. In fact, hold on, let me introduce you to somebody. Come
Sure.
back, Joe. This is Miranda. This is the youth minister here, and she is the youth minister. I'm using her office, and
Hi.
she was one of my first youth ministry kids when I started
Wonderful.
youth ministry, and now she's the youth minister.
That's
So
wonderful.
full
God
circle
bless you.
moment,
Keep, yeah, the
right? Right?
circle
Right.
continues.
So,
Nice meeting you.
all right, no problem. Thank you, Miranda. But the reality of all this is us remembering God is in control. The gratefulness that when I in that despair, when I finally got to Houston, because I ended up in Florida, I didn't have a car. My car was stolen the
Mm,
Wednesday before the storm hit from here
mm,
at Peter Claver from U Group. I came out, there was no car, and I
mm,
couldn't get out. My frat brother came and got me, and we ended up in Florida, and then I ended up in Houston. But in Houston, I think for me, the joy came from the community that we as New Orleanians and as church people in the Houston area that were supporting us gave us,
mm.
helping me remember we're not alone.
Yeah.
Because it was in those those moments of despair, and I'm sure every church person can relate to this, that a certain homily, that a certain song all of a sudden took on a greater meaning, a certain prayer took on even more meaning. And it was in those moments, Joe, that it was for me to get closer to God. Even living, I'm looking at the steeple of our church outside this window, living in the balcony at Peter Claver, trying to rebuild it after the storm, gutting it out and,
Mhm.
protecting it at night, all those things. It was knowing that God, you got me here, you got to take care of me, but knowing that I wasn't alone is what happened. And so for me, um, just the injustices that were revealed, we knew it was here, but many in the world didn't realize how poor New Orleans was. And you still have some of the ignorance, I would call it like that. And I don't think it's sometimes it's malicious, but I think a lot of it is just they just didn't know. There are people that
Mhm.
don't have credit cards, that don't have anywhere to go, didn't know ways to get out, couldn't afford a hotel room. So why would they evacuate?
Yeah.
And so it's just those realities of how do we create a more sustainable way of life for people here. And that's the fight we've been having. So people could afford to come home. Gentrification has caused the houses that used to be 75,000 to cost 300,000 now.
Mm.
And we're still the poorest state, so that's not for us. And so just trying to fight for that way of life is what's been going on here. So understanding that, when we look at the purpose, that, like I said, the purpose of all this is to create equitable and just society for all.
And you use this opportunity in the book to connect to one of the principles of Catholic social teaching, which is care for God's creation. We know that um, some of that destruction that occurred because of Katrina could have been prevented.
Mhm.
People are looking at that now in Texas. Could this have been prevented? Could we have done something different in how we approach the world and how we build protections and so on? Can you give us a little thumbnail here? We don't have too much time, but just talk a
Yeah.
little
So
bit about What does it mean that we need to care for God's creation as, part of our spiritual journey?
At the end of the day, I look at our foreparents, Adam and Eve, in the Garden of Eden. They were charged with taking care of these things God created in this period of creation. And that so too is our responsibility as well. These are all gifts from God. And we see it in indigenous spirituality, Black spirituality, other spiritual traditions. Look at Mother Nature as a living being that we are connected with, not to take from, but to live with. And that's, I think, what we need to remember. And that's what Pope Francis says in his encyclical, talking about care for creation. And even now,
Yes.
Pope Leo the 14th created a mass for creation, right?
Yes.
And so it's important for us because right now, Joe, our home is crying for help. And we need to look at these laws and stuff that's being put in place that continues to harm her because this is our home and this is a gift from God. And we need to look at it like that.
Ansel, you wrap up the book, and I'm using this as a segue into the Q&A. So Denise, get ready to come on. She's got some questions I'm sure folks have been sending in, but you end up by offering us a little bit of hope there and saying it's time that we as a church pray with our feet better than we have ever done before. Why is the time now for us to do this?
Well, I think in this generation with social media and just the way the news networks have been, and then the realities of what's been happening in our world the past few months, years, however you want to look at it, there's nothing new, but some things are being more revealed, and it's affecting more people than it has in the past. Uh, and I say this is a quote from the book. The world needs the church to be a prophetic voice, a voice that confronts injustice to achieve transformative change, one that speaks truth to power, challenges oppressive systems, and amplifies the voices of the marginalized, meaning those on the margins should be leading us. We shouldn't be leading them because they're the ones that are most affected. It's a combination of education, advocacy, and direct action. And in the words of St. John Paul II, and the word of God itself, do not be afraid, family. And I close with this. Let us not be afraid to imagine a world where justice, beauty, and compassion reign, and that's how we pray with our feet to create it.
I'm going to put a big amen on that. What a great way to wrap up the webinar as well as the book. And now we have some time to talk to some of our participants today. So, Denise, we welcome you back, and let's turn it over to you for some questions for Ansel.
Great. So Michael and Dariana both have the same question. They wonder if you could please say more about amplifying marginalized voices. You use this comment several times.
Yeah, well, it's at the end of the day, and I think I said it at the end. When we amplify marginal voices, when we go to the margins, or when we want to make a change that affects the margins are the ones that are experiencing it. So it's important for us to empower the margins to guide us and lead us on how we need to make that change. We don't come in as saviors. That's been the problem. That's why many of the marginalized continue to be marginalized. So we think we know what's best for others. And so that's even just a practice of common youth ministry. I'm not here working with the young people to tell them what they need. I'm here to partner with them as they develop what they need for their peers. So even, because the different cultures that are there, whether it's ethnic cultures, age cultures, just the different cultures that are in our society, how are we uplifting those voices to empower themselves, to help them realize, hey, you can do this. We're just here to help you however we can, to walk with you. That's why I have one of my young people as one of my former youth as the youth minister, and also one of my former youth as my pastor here at the church. But we allowed them to guide themselves, and I think that's the same thing with the marginalized, understanding that there's an issue, but let them help us guide them in how to solve the issue.
Reverend George Dunn is with us, and he's a Methodist minister. And he says, our church says we have open minds, open hearts, and open doors. Do you feel this Wesleyan approach is compatible with praying with our feet?
Oh, definitely. I think definitely. I think at the end of the day, the approach I use in life is the golden rule: love one another as God has loved us. And I think that's it. If we live that out in our laws, in our ways we interact with one another, I think the world will be a better place. And I think it's compatible with all faith traditions that just want to be better with the common good for the world.
Aaron asks, how can laity initiate and support more synodal conversations in our parishes that include the concepts we've been discussing?
Well, I think that's the thing. Each parish has its own makeup. So it's how your parish is designed. How are you having these conversations with those in the parish leadership, staff, pastoral council, those that are in charge of ministries, volunteers, whoever. But then how are you encouraging these conversations to happen in the what do they say, the domestic church at the homes, right? And then beyond the homes, how are you as a parish having these conversations with those in the parish boundaries, especially those on the margins? Uh, how are you connecting with them? So I think it's a multifaceted approach in addressing this. And it depends, like I said, each parish is unique. What we did here at Peter Claver with the door-to-door evangelization might not work somewhere else, but how are you addressing the needs in your own community?
Thank you. Do we have time for one more, Joe?
Sure.
Okay. Rosalie asks, at what age do you think it's appropriate to begin having children serve in ministry? They've done some food drives and CRS Rice Bowl, but are there other things to get youth involved?
I mean, I don't think it's ever too young. I remember when I was in elementary school, they had us doing stuff. I don't remember it too much, but I also remember in high school, when I was a little more, developed. I mean, I was a high school teenager. I don't know if boys ever develop. I think we developed a whole lot later, I'll be honest. But I think for us, there's always ways to allow people to share their gifts. But I go back to what I said, when you engage with, especially with high schoolers, let me put it there. I was a seventh and eighth grade religion teacher here at Peter Claver. That was my biggest cross. Oh my goodness. Middle school is a special place. I'm just going to leave it at that. But they would get in trouble on purpose to come hang with me after school, when the high school kids came. It was just a weird dynamic here. But the fact of the matter is, when I had those high school young people here, I would intentionally allow them to dictate to us, and it had to make sense, of course, what they needed and how they would be allowed to lead. And I think that's how we do that there. So I don't think it's ever too young. If you can walk and talk, you can do God's work.
And I just saw a
Amen.
comment from Yolanda saying children love to serve.
Yeah.
And I agree. Never too young. Doesn't mean we're going to take first graders to, a homeless shelter, but there are ways that we can get them involved in the ministries that the church is involved in. Wonderful questions, everyone. Thank you so much. And I wish we had time for more. Thank you, Denise, for bringing those questions to us, and Ansel for answering them so sharply and quickly. You said you were scattered before, but not at all. You did a great job with those.
That's because it's
Um,
not about me. It's about what God is doing through me, Joe.
Amen. That's wonderful, isn't it? Let's wrap things up now because folks have to move on. But Ansel, I want to thank you so much. This has been just a joy for me and a privilege to see this moment arrive, that your book
Amen.
is here, that you're talking about it, that people are talking about it, and the word is being spread for how we can pray with our feet. Ansel, thank you for showing up so that God can show out.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you, Joe.
And thank you to everyone who participated in this webinar. May it inspire all of us to put on our walking shoes and to take the love of God out into the world, especially to the margins where we will encounter God and conspire with Him to bring about a world transformed. The book is Praying with Our Feet. There's a QR code on the screen that you can scan to get information about how to purchase it. You can find that book at the store.loyolapress.com. You can call our customer service 800-621-1008. And please don't forget that a recording will be available soon at ignatianspirituality.com. Once again, our thanks to Dr. Ansel Augustine for joining us today and teaching us how to pray with our feet. Thank you to all of you. May God bless all of us in our lives and in our ministries. And may the Holy Spirit continue to open wide our hearts and minds to the loving message of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all. Until next time, this is Joe Perpraki. God bless.